Hello, dear friends. The war propaganda is so much in full swing that it is difficult to understand what is really going on. The only solid thing is that there were negotiations which ended with Russia resuming its military operation. I will try to interpret what is happening with the utmost objectivity and equanimity. And if I am wrong about anything, I will correct it the next day. Opinion piece. Peace proposal. Ukraine doesn't negotiate with Moscow. How to achieve an armistice? There is a possible way out of the conflict. Finlandization would be a solution. A question of political realism or realpolitik. Ukraine halts the first wave of 100,000 Russians. Ukraine killed 250,000 cats and dogs in 2012. Investors brace for volatility. The West wants to bend the Russian economy to its will. Russia defends itself well with its gas reserves. Sanctions will hurt our economy. Sanctions will hurt Russian tourism in Spain. European flow of natural gas from Russia increases. Gas prices soar in Europe due to the crisis. The crisis causes the displacement of 100,000 Ukrainians. Ukrainians and Russians in panic run to ATMs. France intercepts a Russian merchant ship in the English Channel. 3 merchant ships hit by missiles in the Black Sea. Attack on merchant ships will raise food prices. Let's start. The duty of every good human being is always to propose peace in any circumstance to save human lives and stop any conflict that causes destruction. And from this modest platform, I propose the Finlandization of Ukraine as a possible solution to this regional crisis that is having a great international repercussion and affects us all at an economic and spiritual level. We are forced by circumstances to get along with our neighbors, as Spain does with Morocco. The Finlandization of Ukraine could be a solution to the crisis. A possible Finlandization of Ukraine would be one of the options to solve the crisis with Russia in order to reach an armistice, an agreement whereby Finland was left out of Western military cooperation, adopting a position of neutrality supervised by Moscow. In return, the country's borders were respected. Finlandization could be explained as a sort of forced neutrality, dating back to the influence of the defunct Soviet Union on neighboring Finland, which signed in 1947 a cooperation agreement whereby Helsinki divested itself of 10% of the territory in the east in favor of the Russians. A controversial Finnish civilian initiative to join NATO received more than 50,000 online votes as of Saturday, meaning that by law it must be voted on by Parliament. Finland has never before sought membership in the Transatlantic Alliance, but the ongoing hostilities in Ukraine have led some Finns to doubt that their nation's independence is safe without reinforcement from the West. Atrocities. An article in Veterans Today claims that the Ukrainian regime is using false flag atrocities to seek Western intervention against Russia. Atrocities in Ukraine are not new. In mid-June 2012, various news agencies reported that 250,000 domestic dogs and cats were killed in Ukraine for the Eurocup, supposedly to maintain order and cleanliness. In quotes. 20,000 domestic animals, mostly dogs and cats, disappeared in Kiev alone, being poisoned, shot, and even burned alive. After an investigation, it became clear that the animals that were supposed to be relocated to different centers or families had been killed. In total, it is estimated that more than 20,000 dogs and cats had been both poisoned and shot, at the request of the Ukrainian authorities. As reported by the British newspaper The Sun, in the city of Donetsk, 35 euros were paid for each dog slaughtered in a kennel. In addition, there were allegations that they used the fur of the dead animals to make hats. Even the French actress Brigitte Bardot called this plan to clean the streets of Ukrainian cities of abandoned dogs barbaric, and sent a letter to the then Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. People who are cruel to animals are also cruel to humans. Karma is unforgiving. Definition. The term Finlandization was coined by the Western media during the Cold War to describe Finland's policy of foreign neutrality. This Nordic country, although once located west on the Iron Curtain, avoided taking a position on issues that might irritate the Soviet Union, which in practice resulted in the reduction of the country's political sovereignty. According to this interpretation, Finland, and to a lesser extent Austria, belonged in many cases to the sphere of Soviet influence, even though it retained its system of Western democracy and did not maintain Soviet forces stationed on its soil like the countries east of the Iron Curtain. The first to use this term were German politicians who feared that the imbalance of forces in favor of the Warsaw Pact would allow the Soviet Union to exercise Finnish-style tutelage over the Federal Republic of Germany. The concept was revived by NATO to justify an increased military presence in Germany and the deployment of Pershing missiles. In Finland, this foreign policy was known as the Paasikivi-Kekkonen doctrine, named after two post-war presidents, Juho Paasikivi and Urho Kekkonen, whose cornerstone was, in the words of President Paasikivi, to take into account the special geopolitical situation of the country, with its almost 700 kilometers of common border with the Soviet Union, which also controlled the southern shore of the Gulf of Finland. According to this view, Finland should refrain from irritating the Soviet Union, because this was simply an attitude of political realism or realpolitik for Finland, which, after having fought 3 wars with its powerful eastern neighbor during the first half of the 20th century, had managed to avoid Soviet occupation and retain its independence. Both Paasikivi and Kekkonen believed that Finnish realpolitik required maintaining the best possible relations with the Soviet Union in order to avoid a very unequal armed conflict where Finland could become a satellite of the Soviet Union or be annexed by the Soviet Union. Reset News. First, Soros supports President Zelensky. Second, Finland rejects a Finlandization of Ukraine to solve the crisis. Third, Ukraine stops the first wave of 100,000 Russians. Ukraine estimated the Russian force at more than 100,000 men, whose first wave has been stopped by the Ukrainian defenses, which have also prevented the encirclement of the capital. Fourth, Remember, you are in the largest military psychological operation in the history of mankind. You are watching a movie. 5. Planned false flag event. What you see on fake news TV is only 1% of reality. You are missing 99%. The coalition says this is a necessary scare event. 6. Many video images you see on fake news are mostly old images that are not happening right now. 7. This would trigger cyber attacks not only in Ukraine but all over the world. 8. The world market crash has already started, and it will be worse now. 9. Cyber attacks and market crash will trigger the global reset. Will trigger communications and internet shutdown for 3 plus 10 days. 10. When you receive a cyber attack on pipelines, banks, critical infrastructure, it is an act of war against the country. Then they will trigger martial law. 11. Ontario, Canada, has shut down 39 trucking businesses after Freedom Convoy protests. 12. Most countries will trigger martial law, not to go to war, but to arrest corrupt people. 13. A new world will emerge after the new QFS quantum financial system and that the Gisara-Well agreement is made official in primary banking. Sanctions. Sanctions against Moscow. Western allies announced sweeping new sanctions against Moscow on Saturday, including the expulsion of major Russian banks from the world's main payment system. As President Zelensky said, Ukrainian forces were repelling Russian troops advancing on Kiev. Second, sanctions imposed by the US last week affected Russia's 10 largest financial institutions that account for 80% of the country's banking assets. Third, Germany and Western allies agreed to remove Russia from SWIFT. Germany and its Western allies agreed to exclude Russia from the SWIFT global payment system in a third sanctions package aimed at halting Russia's military operation in Ukraine. The SWIFT system was founded in 1973 with 239 banks from 15 countries to create a payment system that would work across borders. Fourth, European Union to freeze Putin and Lavrov's assets in Europe. The European Union will freeze the European assets of President Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, hours after the US announced that it will also personally sanction Putin and Lavrov. 5. How much food will be lost globally due to the conflict? Along with a global shortage of fertilizers and herbicides that would have reduced global crop yields by 10%, but we must add the new conflict across two major grain exporters responsible for 25% of all corn and wheat exports. 6. Sanctions will hurt the West. Sanctions could trigger a devastating domino effect as higher oil and gas prices are likely to accelerate already rising inflation and disruption of supply chains. Europe depends on Russia for 46% of its natural gas and 27% of its oil, while the US imports more than 100,000 barrels per day from Russia. 7. Sanctions damage Russian tourism in Spain. The tourist associations of the Costa del Sol fear that the military intervention in Ukraine and the relevant sanctions will condition the arrival of Russian and Ukrainian tourism. In the case of the former, in spite of not being the most numerous nationality, it is one of those that generates more expenditure. Russia. First, experts agree that Putin has got his way, despite the sanctions. In the uncertain scenario of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and in the face of the lukewarm international reaction, experts in diplomacy agree that Putin has got his way, and the threats of economic sanctions have been of little use, but one that this political game is not yet over. Second, Putin is having an easier crisis thanks to oil and his reserves. Russia's central bank took the pre-dawn crisis in stride this week, avoiding an interest rate hike while granting more liquidity to lenders, along with words of assurance that it is ready to provide more support after Western sanctions. Third, Russia vetoes UN Security Council resolution. Russia has used its veto power to block the UN Security Council resolution condemning Ukraine's military operation. The abstention of China, India, and the United Arab Emirates left Russia alone. The other 11 members voted in favor. 4. Russia's space agency responds to Western sanctions. Roscosmos will stop working on joint space projects with Europe and the United States and instead seek cooperation with China. China. First, Chinese banks limit their financing for Russian purchases. China's largest public financial institutions are limiting financing to buy raw materials from Russia under the threat of sanctions from the US and its allies over the military operation in Ukraine. Second, suspicious timing. China announces the military exercises from Sunday to Tuesday in the South Sea near the border with Taiwan, within a radius of 6 nautical miles. Third, China says warships sailing in Taiwan Strait provocative. A US warship sailed through the sensitive Taiwan Strait on Saturday, part of what the Navy calls routine activity, but China called it provocative. Measures. France intercepts Russian merchant ship in the English Channel. The French Navy diverted the vessel carrying a vehicle in English Channel waters in enforcement of European Union economic sanctions on Russia. It was bound for the Russian city of St. Petersburg, has been diverted to the port of Boulogne-sur-Mer. Second, merchant ships hit by missiles. Ukrainian and Russian grain, 30% of the world exports, are no longer moving after 3 merchant ships were hit by missiles in the Black Sea, including one chartered by Cargill to carry grain. Brazil is in a frenzy after fertilizer imports from Russia are threatened. Global food trade is being halted and food prices are soaring further as the conflict escalates. Third, NATO deploys its response force to react quickly in case of need. For the first time, NATO is to deploy its response force in the framework of collective defense to protect the countries on the eastern flank of the Atlantic Alliance from any threat from Russia. 4. Russia closes its airspace for aircraft from Bulgaria, Poland, and the Czech Republic. Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency announced Saturday that the country restricted the use of its airspace for air operators from Bulgaria, Poland, and the Czech Republic because of unfriendly actions by the aviation authorities of these states. 5. Russia claims Ukrainian military gunboats attacked ships carrying captive Ukrainian servicemen. 16 Ukrainian Navy gunboats attacked Russian Black Sea Fleet ships Friday night as they were carrying the 82 Ukrainian servicemen who surrendered on Snake Island off the northern Black Sea coast. 6 Ukrainian Navy boats were destroyed and none of the prisoners were injured, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. 6. The President of Ukraine signs a decree on general mobilization. Vladimir Zelensky has signed a decree calling for general mobilization in Ukraine. 7. Kiev massively distributed automatic weapons, grenade launchers, and ammunition to civilians. The Russian Defense Ministry has stated that the Ukrainian authorities are massively and uncontrolled distributing weapons to civilian citizens, stressing that actions to involve the population in military activities would lead to human losses. 8. Desperate Ukrainian soldiers prevent locals from leaving Mariupol and pull them out of their cars. 9. Military experts claims that the Ukrainian army deploys armaments in urban areas and puts civilian lives at risk. 10. Kremlin says Ukraine refuses to hold negotiations. The Ukrainian side has refused to hold negotiations with Russia, Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Saturday. 11. Objectives. In quotes, the objectives of the operation were openly declared: demilitarization and denazification, said Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. 12. Russian embassy sends evidence to the Argentine Foreign Ministry. The Russian embassy in Argentina sent to the Republic's Foreign Ministry photographs of alleged war crimes committed in Donbass, spokesman for the Russian diplomatic mission said. Volatility. First, investors brace for volatility. Investors were bracing Saturday for more sharp gyrations in asset prices after Western nations announced a series of tough sanctions to punish Russia, including blocking some banks from the SWIFT international payments system. Second, dollar retreats. The dollar fell on Friday, a day after posting its biggest one-day percentage gain in more than 3 months, as investors assessed the latest round of sanctions against Russia and inflation data would prevent the Federal Reserve from being too hawkish at its next policy meeting. Third, stock market scores its worst session since 2020. Wall Street closed Friday in the green, with its main gauge. The Dow Jones Industrials up to 2.51% in its worst session since late 2020, despite concerns over Ukraine. Energy crisis. First, Ukraine sends gas prices soaring in Europe. Wholesale prices at the European gas hub in the Netherlands hit €142 per megawatt hour on Thursday, before retreating slightly for a total daily gain of 40%. Second, European gas flows from Russia rise despite sanctions. Natural gas prices in Europe spiked to a record high after Russia boosted flows to the continent and US sanctions against Moscow shut out the energy sector. Greece sees no disruption in gas flows. Gas flows to Greece are smooth, and Greek gas suppliers have lined up additional gas cargoes if needed, Energy Minister Kostas Sekrekas said Friday. Fourth, Germany burnt a lot more coal last year. Coal-fire-powered generation surged 24% last year as the energy crisis boosted the incentive for Germany's top electricity producer to use the traditional fuel. 5. EU will have to cope with Ukraine's huge financial needs. Ukraine's financial needs after the Russian military intervention will be huge, and the European Union will have to come up with the money. European Commission Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis said on Friday. Markets. Gold and palladium fall. Gold prices reversed coal and fell 1% on Friday, and palladium also fell, a day after prices soared to 18th-month highs, as the Ukraine crisis triggered sharp swings in the precious metals market. Second, metals market braced for chaos. Key metals prices have railed in the recent weeks, buoyed above earlier gains made in the wake of energy shortages, power costs, and Chinese environmental restrictions. Aluminium and nickel prices in particular have hit multi-year highs on fears that sanctions will lead to a supply disruption from Russia. Cryptocurrencies recover. Panic over the Russian military operation in Ukraine hit cryptocurrencies hard. The outlook is brightening, with other risk-sensitive assets, such as tech stocks, coming off their lows. 4. Ukraine crisis could send stocks tumbling for weeks before market bottoms. Stocks staged an impressive reversal on February 24th, including a 950-point daily move higher from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But there is too much enthusiasm to declare that the market has bottomed. 5. ECB believes war will bring more inflation and uncertainty. The European Central Bank considers it premature to assess the economic impact of the war in Ukraine, but anticipates that there will be a pickup in inflation, which will materialize in figures on March 10th, and also more uncertainty. Reactions. Several demonstrations in Europe, this is the first point, called on Russia to stop the war in Ukraine. Europeans called on Russia to stop the war at rallies in Berlin, Paris, Warsaw, or The Hague, flying Ukrainian flags. Hundreds of people have shown in the German capital their support to Kiev. The German executive has announced the creation of a gas and coal reserve to reduce its energy dependence on Russia. Second, panicked Ukrainians and Russians rushed to ATMs. Long lines of people trying to withdraw cash have sparked fears of bank runs. Ukrainian citizens flooded the country's ATMs on Thursday in an attempt to withdraw their cash as the military conflict with Russia intensified. Russians have also been lining up at banks. Third, Ukraine crisis causes displacement of 100,000 people. Thousands of Ukrainians began fleeing their homes on Thursday, February 24th. Authorities in Moldova, Romania, Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic have reported that a wave of displaced people began arriving in their countries. 4. Poland sets up reception centers for Ukrainians and expects 30,000 daily. The Polish government has set up 8 refugee reception centers along its border with Ukraine, set up telephone helplines, and on Friday provided information on its website for Ukrainians arriving in Poland. 5. UK says Russian forces limit access to social media to hide details on Ukraine. Britain said Saturday that Russian forces have restricted several social media platforms in an attempt to hide details about the situation in Ukraine from its own people. 6. Musk says Starlink active in Ukraine as internet disrupted. SpaceX billionaire Elon Musk said Saturday that the company Starlink satellite broadband service is available in Ukraine and that the SpaceX is sending more terminals to the country, whose internet has been disrupted by the Russian military operation. 7. Trump praise for Ukrainian people. Former President Trump on Saturday condemned Russia's military intervention of Ukraine and said he was praying for Ukrainians, marking a sharp change in tone from earlier this week when he praised Russian President Vladimir Putin. 8. New York Trump probe gets new prosecutor after lawyers resign. A new prosecutor was chosen to lead an investigation against former President Trump, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office said Friday, after the departure of two top lawyers cast doubt on the future of the probe. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.